The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by ㅤㅤㅤㅤ. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 30. Morning Dew, Part 4. After summoning Wen Ning, Wei Wuxian's state of mind was a bit of a mess, so he found it difficult to avoid lapses in vigilance. Moreover, if Lan Wangji did not want his arrival to be noticed, he of course had no trouble avoiding being seen or heard. Thus, when Wei Wuxian whirled around and saw that increasingly frosty face beneath the moonlight, his startled heart nearly skipped a beat. He didn't know how long Lan Wangji had been here, and whether the man had witnessed everything he had done and said. If Lan Wangji had never been drunk to begin with, and followed him the entire way, then the situation was even more awkward. Wei Wuxian had kept quiet about Wen Ning to his friend's face and bided his time until Lan Wangji went to sleep to summon him. Truly awkward indeed. Arms crossed, Lan Wangji held Bichen to his chest, an icy expression on his face. Wei Wuxian had never seen him so clearly displeased, and felt compelled to open his mouth and offer an explanation to ease the tense atmosphere. "Oh, Han Guangjin!" No response. Wei Wuxian stood in front of Wen Ning and stared face to face at Lan Wangji. He rubbed his chin. For some reason, he felt extraordinarily guilty. Finally, Lan Wangji let down the hand that was holding Bichen and walked forward a couple of steps. When Wei Wuxian saw that he was headed straight for Wen Ning and still wielding his sword, he thought he intended to behead the fierce corpse. His mood made a sharp turn. Oh no! What if Lan Zhan was pretending to be drunk so that I would come out and summon Wen Ning and he could chop his head off? I should have known. How could anyone possibly pass out from a single bowl? Han Guangjin, listen to me! Smack. Lan Wangji struck Wen Ning with the palm of his hand. Though the strike rang sharp and clear, it posed no real danger. Wen Ning endured it, staggering several steps backward. He wobbled, then steadied himself and stood up straight again, a vacant expression upon his face. Nothing more. In his current state, Wen Ning no longer possessed the explosive temper he had displayed during his past bouts of murderous insanity. But his temperament hadn't improved that much either. When he had been surrounded and attacked that night on Dafan Mountain, he had flown into a violent fit before a single blade had managed to touch him. He had even grabbed someone by the neck and lifted them off the ground. If Wei Wuxian hadn't stopped him, he would have inevitably choked the life out of everyone on sight, one by one. Yet, after Lan Wangji had slapped him, he continued to keep his head lowered, as though he did not have the courage to resist. Wei Wuxian thought this was a bit strange, but still breathed a sigh of relief. If Wen Ning had fought back, then it would have become even harder to mediate between them. At that moment, Lan Wangji seemed to feel as though his single strike had not adequately expressed his rage and pushed Wen Ning several meters away. "Go away," he said, very unhappily. Wei Wuxian finally noticed that something was off. Both the slap and the push and the language he had used were very childish. After shoving Wen Ning a sufficient distance away, Lan Wangji finally appeared satisfied. He turned, walked back to Wei Wuxian and stood by his side. Wei Wuxian scrutinized him thoroughly. Neither Lan Wangji's complexion or his expression looked the slightest bit different. In fact, he appeared even more solemn and proper than usual. Even more the picture of excellence than usual. His forehead ribbon was extremely straight, his face absent of redness. He wasn't panting, and his stride was as confident as ever, not the least bit unsteady. Outwardly, he was still the stern, impeccable, calm and self-possessed cultivator of great renown, Han Guangjin. But when Wei Wuxian tipped his gaze downward, he discovered that Lan Wangji was wearing his boots on the wrong feet. Before Wei Wuxian had gone out, he had helped Lan Wangji remove his boots, tossing them by the side of his bed afterwards. But now, Lan Wangji's left boot was on his right foot, and his right boot was on his left. Han Guangjun, whose elegance and commitment to propriety were unrivaled, who hailed from a mighty and prestigious clan, couldn't possibly have gone out in public dressed like this. Han Guangjun, what number is this? Wei Wuxian asked tentatively. He held up 2 fingers. Lan Wangji did not answer, but instead solemnly extended his hands, both the left and the right, and carefully wrapped them around Wei Wuxian's outstretched fingers. Beecham, no longer held by its owner, clattered to the ground. This was absolutely not the normal Lan Zhan. Han Guangjun, are you drunk? Wei Wuxian asked. No, Lan Wangji replied. Obviously, drunk people never admitted they were drunk. Wei Wuxian pulled back his fingers, but Lan Wangji continued holding his hands as though they were still wrapped around the withdrawn appendages, focusing intently on maintaining the empty fists. Wei Wuxian watched him, speechless. Surrounded by the cold night winds, he lifted his head and gazed at the moon. Everyone else got drunk first and fell asleep later, yet Lan Wangji slept first and became drunk later. On top of that, when he was drunk, he still looked the same as he always did, making it very difficult to discern his inebriation. In the old days, when Wei Wuxian had possessed countless drinking buddies, he had seen extremely strange and shameful drunk behavior of every description. Some people wailed and sobbed, some giggled themselves silly, some went crazy and caused scenes, some passed out and lay like a corpse right in the middle of the street. Some became determined to kill themselves, and some cried, "Why don't you want me anymore?" But this was the first time he'd ever seen anyone like Lan Wangji, someone who didn't raise a fuss or cause a ruckus, whose expression remained perfectly proper, but whose behavior was bizarre beyond comparison. The corner of Wei Wuxian's mouth twitched, and he forcefully suppressed his laughter. Picking up the fallen Biechin, he swung it over his back and said, "All right, that's enough. Let's head back." He couldn't let Lan Wangji run wild in public. Only heaven knew what he might do. Fortunately, it seemed that when Lan Wangji was drunk, he was also easy to persuade. He nodded his head elegantly and stepped forward with Wei Wuxian. Anyone who happened to pass by would surely have believed that these were a pair of intimate friends, out for a nighttime walk and conversation, and exclaim about the culture and sophistication of this act. Behind them, Wen Ning followed silently. Just as Wei Wuxian was about to speak to him, Lan Wangji whirled around and angrily struck him again. This time, the blow landed on Wen Ning's head. After his head was slapped nearly crooked, it drooped even lower. Wen Ning's face was clearly that of a corpse, rigid and devoid of any expression. His 2 white eyes also could not display emotions, yet nonetheless, he appeared very aggrieved. Wei Wuxian wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. He pulled back Lan Wangji's arm. "Why are you hitting him?" Lan Wangji spoke in a threatening voice he never would have used if he was sober. "Go away!" Knowing that no one should argue with a drunk person, Wei Wuxian hastily said, all right, he'll do as you say. If you want him to go away, he'll go away." As he spoke, he pulled out his flute. But before he even managed to place it beside his lips, Lan Wangji snatched it from his fingers. "No playing for him." "Why are you being so bossy?" Wei Wuxian teased mockingly. Displeased, Lan Wangji repeated himself. "No playing for him." Wei Wuxian discovered something. Drunk people often had a lot to say, but Lan Wangji usually kept his mouth shut. Thus, when he drank too much, he would repeat the same sentence ad infinitum. Since Lan Wangji looked down on improper, wicked techniques, It occurred to Wei Wuxian that he might dislike seeing him controlling Wen-ning with the music of the flute. It was like petting a cat. He had to stroke his fur in the right direction. "All right, I'll only play for you. Happy?" Lan Fangji let out a satisfied but he did not return the flute, and instead fiddled with it with his hands. Wei Wuxian could only whistle a couple of times and say to Wen-ning, "It's better if you hide yourself. Don't let anyone find you." Wen-ning looked as though he very much wanted to follow Wei Wuxian. However, he had been ordered not to, and he was also afraid Lan Fangji would hit him again. So, very slowly, he turned away. Dragging his feet, chains clanging, head hanging dejectedly, he departed. "Lan Zhan, how come your face doesn't get red when you're drunk?" Wei Wuxian asked. Because Lan Fangji looked far too normal, more normal than even Wei Wuxian, the latter couldn't help but speak to him as though he were a normal person. He had no idea that, upon hearing this sentence, Lan Fangji would suddenly reach out his hand, seize him by the shoulder, and pull him into an embrace. Wei Wuxian was caught off guard and crashed head first into his chest. Dizzy, he heard Lan Fangji's voice overhead. "Listen to the heartbeat." "What?" "The face doesn't show anything. Listen to the heartbeat." As Lan Fangji spoke, his chest resonated along with the quiet sound of a heart, continually and vigorously beating. It was a little fast. Wei Wuxian lifted his head and spoke with comprehension. "I can't see your feelings in your face, so I have to listen to your heartbeat in order to understand?" Lan Fangji said sincerely. Wei Wuxian clutched his abdomen, laughing. Could the skin on Lan Fangji's face be so thick that it prevented his blush from showing through? Seemed not. The drunken version of Lan Fangji was astonishingly honest and forthcoming, and moreover, compared to his usual self, his words and actions were so bold and unrepressed. It was rare to encounter such an open and unreserved Lan Fangji. How could Wei Wuxian possibly treat him with due respect and resist making mischief? He chased Lan Fangji back to the inn. After returning inside the room, Wei Wuxian pinned him to the bed and pulled off his incorrectly worn boots. He then thought for a bit, and concluded that Lan Fangji probably wasn't capable of washing his own face in his current state. Wei Wuxian removed his friend's head ribbon and brought a basin of warm water and a washcloth inside. After wringing the excess water from the washcloth, he folded it into a square and began lightly wiping Lan Fangji's face clean. Throughout the entire process, Lan Fangji put up absolutely no resistance, obediently allowing Wei Wuxian to gently massage his face with a washcloth. Other than squinting when the cloth approached his eyes, he stared at Wei Wuxian the entire time, unblinking. All kinds of devious plots began brewing in Wei Wuxian's guts. Seeing Lan Fangji's crystal-clear gaze staring back at him, he couldn't help but brush his finger against his friend's chin. "Why are you looking at me? Enjoying the view?" As he happened to finish washing Lan Fangji's face just at that time, Wei Wuxian did not wait for a reply. He threw the washcloth into the basin, continuing, "Your face is washed. Do you want to drink some water before doing anything else?" He heard nothing behind him, so he turned his head and glanced back. Lan Fangji was holding up the water basin and had buried his face inside. Wei Wuxian turned pale in alarm and hastily snatched away the basin. "I didn't tell you to drink the water in here!" Expression still as tranquil as ever, Lan Fangji lifted his head. Bead by bead of clear water dripped from his jaw, dampening the front of his robes. Wei Wuxian watched him, feeling many indescribable emotions. Did he drink it or not? It's best if Lan Zhan doesn't remember anything after he sobers up. Otherwise, he'll be too embarrassed to show his face to anyone again. Using his sleeve, Wei Wuxian wiped off the beads of water on Lan Fangji's lower jaw. Then he seized him by the shoulders. Han Guangjun, you'll do whatever I tell you now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lan Wangji replied. And you'll answer any question I ask?
Mm-hmm.
Wei Wuxian pressed one knee against the bed, one corner of his mouth quirking up. Good. Then let me ask you. Have you ever secretly drunk the emperor's smile you hid in your room?
No.
Do you like rabbits? Wei Wuxian said.
Yes.
Have you violated any prohibitions?
Yes.
Have you ever had a crush on anyone?
Yes.
Wei Wuxian stopped probing here. He didn't have any true intention of using this opportunity to uncover Lan Wangji's secrets. He only wanted to confirm whether Lan Wangji would, in fact, answer any question he asked. What do you think about Jiang Cheng? Wei Wuxian asked. Lan Wangji frowned. What do you think about Wen Ning? He let out a cold sigh. Grinning broadly, Wei Wuxian pointed at himself. What do you think about this one here?
Mine,
Lan Wangji said. He fixed his gaze on Wei Wuxian and spoke with the utmost clarity, pausing after each word.
Is mine.
Suddenly, Wei Wuxian understood. He pulled Bichen off his back, thinking, I was pointing to myself just now, but Lan Zhan thought that this I was referring to was Bichen. Having come to this conclusion, Wei Wuxian got off the bed and paced back and forth across the room with Bichen in his hand. As expected, wherever he walked, Lan Wangji's eyes would immediately follow, incomparably open, naked, and honest. Lan Wangji's passionate, fiery gaze seemed to bore into Wei Wuxian to the point that he could barely stand up. He lifted Bichen in front of Lan Wangji's eyes. Do you want this?
Yes, I do,
Lan Wangji said. Seemingly believing this was insufficient proof of his desire, he grabbed the hand with which Wei Wuxian was holding Bichen. Looking straight at him with his pale irises, Lan Wangji inhaled softly, then repeated himself, enunciating each word with great effort.
Yes, I do.
Wei Wuxian knew perfectly well that his friend was completely plastered, and that these words were not directed at him, but he was still so struck by them that his arms and legs went weak. This Lan Zhan is so... If he ever spoke this openly and ardently to a girl, imagine what a terrifyingly attractive man he would be. Putting his thoughts back in order, Wei Wuxian said, How did you recognize me? Why did you help me? Lan Wangji parted his lips slightly, and Wei Wuxian moved a bit closer to him, wanting to hear his answer. How could he have known that Lan Wangji's expression would suddenly change and the man would raise his hands and push him onto the bed? Bichen swept over the candles and extinguished their flames, and then its master let it clatter to the floor again. The force of the shove had sent golden stars dancing before his eyes. Believing that Lan Wangji had sobered up, he called out, Lan Zhan? A hand struck a familiar location on his lower back, and he felt as though he had returned to the first night at the cloud recesses. His entire body was sore and numb, and he was completely paralyzed. Lan Wangji withdrew his hand, laid down beside him, and covered both of them with a blanket, carefully tucking Wei Wuxian in.
It is 9 o'clock. Time to rest.
The culprit turned out to be the Lan clan's scary rules about work and sleep. Staring at the ceiling above his bed, his interrogation cut short, Wei Wuxian asked, Can't we rest and chat at the same time?
No.
Fine. There would always be another opportunity to get Lan Wangji drunk again. Sooner or later, he would get his answer. Lan Zhan, take this thing off, Wei Wuxian said. I reserved 2 rooms. We don't need to squeeze ourselves into a single bed. After a moment of stillness, Lan Wangji's hand reached out toward him and began to grope around underneath the blanket and slowly began to undo Wei Wuxian's robes.
No, stop! I didn't mean take off my clothes. Ugh! Fine. I'll keep lying down. I'll go to sleep.
Amidst darkness, a dead silence. After keeping his mouth shut for what seemed like half the night, Wei Wuxian spoke again.
Now I finally know why your clan prohibits drinking. Not only do you pass out after a single drink, you make for a horrible drunk. If everyone in the Lan clan is like you when they're drunk, you guys should be prohibited from drinking. Anyone who drinks deserves to be hit. And...
Eyes still closed, Lan Fangji lifted his hand and covered Wei Wuxian's mouth. "Shh," he said. Wei Wuxian's breath was trapped between the pit of his stomach and his mouth. He could neither breathe it out nor swallow it. It seemed like ever since he had returned, every time he wanted to mess with Lan Fangji like in the old days, in the end, it was he who wound up reaping what he had sown. How could this be? Where had he gone wrong?